After Vladimir Lenin's death in January 1924, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union entered a prolonged period of internal conflict over succession. The question was not merely about individuals but represented fundamental disagreements about the direction of the Soviet state and the role of the Soviet Union in international communism. Two men emerged as the primary contenders: Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. Each represented distinctly different visions for the future and possessed contrasting personalities and political styles. Leon Trotsky, born Lev Davidovich Bronstein in 1879, had established himself as one of the most prominent figures in the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. Before the revolution, he had been a revolutionary activist and writer with an international reputation among socialist movements. During the revolution, he played a crucial role in organizing the seizure of power in Petrograd. Following the Bolshevik takeover, his most significant achievement came when he organized and led the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. Starting virtually from nothing, he built a military force that defeated the various White Army forces and interventionist armies from Britain, France, Japan, the United States, and other countries between 1918 and 1921. This victory was essential to the survival of the Bolshevik state. Beyond his military accomplishments, Trotsky developed significant theoretical contributions to Marxist thought. He advocated for what he called permanent revolution, a complex theory arguing that in backward countries like Russia, the working class would need to take power and carry through both democratic and socialist tasks simultaneously. More controversially, the theory argued that socialist revolutions must spread internationally and that the Soviet Union could not survive indefinitely in isolation. Trotsky believed that building complete socialism in one country, particularly a backward agricultural nation like Russia surrounded by hostile capitalist powers, was theoretically impossible and practically dangerous. He maintained that the Soviet Union must actively support revolutionary movements abroad and that the fate of socialism in Russia was linked to revolution in more advanced industrial countries, particularly Germany. Joseph Stalin, born Iosif Vissarionovich Yuhashvili in 1878, presented a stark contrast. While Trotsky was known as a brilliant orator, writer, and theorist with an international profile, Stalin had spent years working quietly within the party apparatus, building networks of personal loyalty and mastering organizational politics. Stalin held the position of General Secretary of the Communist Party since 1922. Many initially considered this an administrative role of limited importance, but Stalin understood that control over personnel appointments translated directly into political power. He systematically placed loyal supporters in key positions throughout the party structure at all levels. Stalin developed a different ideological stance, promoting the concept of socialism in one country. This theory suggested that the Soviet Union could build a complete socialist society within its own borders without waiting for international revolution. Stalin argued that the Soviet Union possessed sufficient resources to construct socialism independently, though he acknowledged that final victory would be more secure with successful revolutions elsewhere. This message appealed powerfully to many party members and ordinary citizens, exhausted from years of war and economic hardship. The idea of focusing on internal development resonated with nationalist sentiments and offered a concrete program rather than waiting for uncertain international events. Vladimir Lenin, during his final months while partially incapacitated by strokes beginning in May 1922, dictated several documents that became known collectively as Lenin's Testament. These writings, produced between December 1922 and January 1923, represented Lenin's attempt to address the party's future leadership. In these documents, Lenin evaluated various party leaders with considerable frankness. Regarding Stalin, Lenin expressed serious concerns, noting that Stalin had accumulated enormous power as general secretary and questioning whether he always used it with sufficient caution. Lenin was particularly disturbed by Stalin's rudeness and his handling of the Georgian affair, where Stalin supported using force against Georgian communists who resisted centralization. In a postscript added in January 1923, Lenin suggested that the party consider removing Stalin from his position and replacing him with someone more patient, loyal, polite, and considerate. Regarding Trotsky, Lenin acknowledged his outstanding abilities and intellect, calling him arguably the most capable man in the Central Committee. However, Lenin also noted what he perceived as excessive self-confidence and a tendency to focus too much on administrative rather than political matters. Lenin commented on other leaders as well, with the overall tone suggesting he wanted collective leadership rather than power concentrated in any single individual. Lenin died on January 21, 1924, before these documents could significantly influence party politics. The testament was read to party leaders in May 1924 but was not widely published or openly discussed. Stalin's supporters argued against taking drastic action based on Lenin's concern. Trotsky himself, for complex political reasons, including not wanting to appear to use Lenin's death for personal advantage, did not push aggressively for the testament's recommendations. The documents, therefore, did not immediately alter power dynamics within the party. Stalin built a coalition with Grigory Zinoviev, who headed the Leningrad Party Organization and the Communist International, and Lev Kamenev, who led the Moscow Party Organization. This group controlled key party institutions and used them systematically to marginalize Trotsky. They controlled the party apparatus and could therefore determine who attended meetings, what issues were discussed, and how votes were conducted. They could frame political debates in terms favoring their positions. Between 1924 and 1927, Stalin systematically undermined Trotsky's position through political maneuvering, ideological attacks, and organizational measures. Trotsky's supporters found themselves transferred to remote positions or removed from influential roles. Party conferences featured orchestrated criticism of Trotsky's ideas, particularly his theory of permanent revolution, which opponents characterized as insufficiently patriotic and too risky for Soviet security. The debate over permanent revolution versus socialism in one country connected to practical questions about economic policy, foreign policy, and the pace of socialist construction. Trotsky and his supporters favored more rapid industrialization, higher taxes on better-off peasants to fund industrial development, and more aggressive support for revolutionary movements abroad. Stalin's allies initially advocated for a more cautious approach, maintaining the alliance with the peasantry and focusing on gradual internal development. Trotsky's intellectual style made him vulnerable to political attacks. He could be perceived as arrogant or dismissive. He had joined the Bolshevik Party only in 1917, having previously been critical of Lenin, and Stalin's faction used this history to question his loyalty to Bolshevik traditions. Trotsky sometimes misjudged political situations, failing to attend crucial meetings or to build effective alliances. By 1925, Stalin broke with Zinoviev and Kamenev, who were becoming concerned about his growing power. Stalin then allied with party rightists, including Nikolai Bukharin. This new coalition defeated Zinoviev and Kamenev, who then attempted to ally with Trotsky in the United Opposition in 1926. However, this alliance was too late and too contradictory to succeed. In October 1927, the party expelled Trotsky from the Central Committee. In November, he was expelled from the Communist Party itself, along with many supporters. The official charges included forming an illegal faction and undermining party unity. In January 1929, Soviet authorities forced Trotsky into exile from the Soviet Union, first to Turkey, then France in 1933, Norway in 1935, and finally Mexico in 1937. Throughout this period, Stalin consolidated control through increasingly authoritarian measures. He broke with his rightist allies in 1928 and 1929, launching forced rapid industrialization and agricultural collectivization far more radical than anything Trotsky had proposed. The collectivization campaign led to massive peasant resistance and catastrophic famine in 1932 and 1933, particularly severe in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other grain-growing regions. Millions died from starvation and violence. Stalin then initiated purges that eliminated most old Bolsheviks who had made the revolution. The Great Purge peaked between 1936 and 1938, with three major show trials in Moscow. Zinoviev and Kamenev were tried and executed in August 1936. Karl Radek and Grigory Pyatakov were tried in January 1937. Bukharin and others were tried in March 1938. All were accused of conspiring with Trotsky to sabotage Soviet construction and restore capitalism. These accusations were entirely fabricated, extracted through torture, but served Stalin's purpose of eliminating anyone who remembered alternative possibilities. From exile, Trotsky continued his political activities with remarkable energy. He wrote extensively, producing books and articles analyzing Soviet developments and critiquing Stalin's leadership. His major work, The Revolution Betrayed, published in 1936, provided comprehensive analysis of how the Soviet Union had developed since the revolution. Trotsky argued that Stalin had betrayed the revolution and established a bureaucratic dictatorship rather than genuine workers' democracy. He characterized the Soviet Union as a degenerated workers' state where socialist property relations remained, but political power had been usurped by a privileged bureaucratic caste. Trotsky also wrote detailed critiques of the Moscow trials, demonstrating internal contradictions and impossibilities in the accusations. His analysis was vindicated decades later when Soviet archives confirmed the charges had been entirely fabricated. In September 1938, Trotsky and his followers founded the Fourth International in France. This organization was intended to unite revolutionary socialists who rejected both Stalinist parties and social democratic parties. Though the Fourth International never achieved significant mass influence, it maintained organized opposition to Stalin's policies and attempted to present an alternative vision of communist politics. Stalin viewed Trotsky's continued activities as problematic for several reasons. Trotsky maintained credibility among some communists internationally due to his revolutionary history and intellectual capabilities. His writings provided theoretical ammunition for those questioning Stalin's methods. His critiques of the Moscow trials challenged the legitimacy of Stalin's purges. Most fundamentally, Trotsky represented a symbolic threat because his mere existence suggested that Stalin's claim to be Lenin's rightful heir was contested. The Soviet secret police, operating under various acronyms including NKVD, had been attempting to neutralize Trotsky for years. Several of Trotsky's family members died under suspicious circumstances during the 1930s. His daughter Zinaida committed suicide in Berlin in 1933. His daughter Nina died in Moscow in 1928. His son Sergei, who had remained in the Soviet Union and was not politically active, was arrested in 1935 and eventually executed. His son, Leon Sedov, who served as Trotsky's secretary and closest political collaborator, died in a Paris hospital in 1938 under circumstances suggesting possible NKVD involvement. Soviet agents made a direct armed assault on Trotsky's residence in Mexico City on May 24, 1940. A group of approximately 20 men, led by painter David Alfaro Siqueiros, attacked the house with machine guns and incendiary devices, firing more than 200 rounds. Remarkably, Trotsky, his wife Natalia Sedova, and their grandson survived by taking shelter. Following this failure, the NKVD pursued a different approach. An agent named Ramon Mercader had been recruited by Soviet intelligence and prepared for a mission against Trotsky. Mercader was born in Spain in 1913, and his mother Caridad Mercader worked for Soviet intelligence. Mercader had fought on the Republican side during the Spanish Civil War and was recruited by the NKVD during or after that conflict. Mercader successfully gained access to Trotsky's circle by developing a romantic relationship with Sylvia Agilov, an American Trotskyist who worked as one of Trotsky's secretaries. Mercader met Agilov in Paris in 1938, presenting himself under the false name Jacques Mornard as a Belgian businessman. He cultivated this relationship carefully, eventually accompanying Agilov to Mexico. There he presented himself as Frank Jackson, claiming to be Canadian, and gradually became a familiar figure around Trotsky's fortified household. Over several months during 1940, Mercader established himself as a trusted figure with regular access to Trotsky's home. He visited multiple times, appearing casual and friendly. Security guards became accustomed to his presence. On August 20, 1940, Mercader entered Trotsky's study in the afternoon, carrying an ice axe concealed under a raincoat. He claimed he wanted Trotsky to review an article. While Trotsky sat at his desk reading, Mercader removed the ice axe and struck Trotsky in the head with the pointed end of the mountaineering tool. The blow penetrated Trotsky's skull approximately 7 centimeters. Trotsky did not die immediately. Despite the severe head wound, he fought with his assailant, biting Mercader's hand. Trotsky's screams brought guards who rushed in, disarmed Mercader, and began beating him. Trotsky reportedly told them not to kill his assassin, saying he must be made to talk. Mexican police arrested Mercader at the scene. Trotsky was taken to a hospital where doctors performed emergency surgery, but the wound was too severe. He died on August 21, 1940, at 7:30 in the evening. He was 60 years old. Mercader was tried in Mexican courts and convicted of murder in April 1943, receiving a 20-year prison sentence. During his imprisonment and for years afterward, Mercader maintained various cover stories about his identity and motives. However, evidence that emerged over subsequent decades, including testimony from Soviet defectors and documents from Soviet archives, confirmed his identity, his mother's role in Soviet intelligence, and his connection to the NKVD operation. After his release in May 1960, Mercader traveled to Czechoslovakia and then to the Soviet Union, where he lived under state protection. He received recognition and awards for his service, including the title Hero of the Soviet Union, though this honor was kept secret during his lifetime. He eventually moved to Cuba, where he lived until his death in October 1978. He never publicly admitted his role or expressed remorse. The elimination of Trotsky removed the last major figure from the original Bolshevik leadership who remained outside Stalin's control and actively opposed his rule. By 1940, Stalin had already executed or imprisoned virtually all prominent old Bolsheviks who had participated in the revolution. Of the members of the first Politburo formed in 1919, only Stalin himself remained alive and free. From Stalin's standpoint, Trotsky's continued existence posed multiple challenges. It challenged the historical narrative that portrayed Stalin as Lenin's closest collaborator and natural successor, while minimizing other leaders' roles. It challenged Stalin's ideological authority by offering an alternative interpretation of Marxism. It challenged Stalin's political monopoly by maintaining that communist politics could be conducted differently, with internal party democracy, and without mass terror. Most fundamentally, it challenged Stalin's legitimacy by embodying the memory that the revolution had been a collective endeavor with multiple leaders, that Lenin had criticized Stalin, and that alternatives to Stalin's system had once existed. The assassination therefore represented not merely the elimination of a personal rival but the attempt to erase historical memory itself. Stalin sought to create a situation where no one with authority and credibility could testify to the actual history of the revolution, allowing Stalin to reshape that history according to his needs. By 1940, with Trotsky dead, Stalin had largely succeeded in this aim within territories under Soviet control. The history taught in Soviet schools and published in Soviet books presented Stalin as the hero of the revolution, while Trotsky was portrayed as a traitor. This falsified history persisted in the Soviet Union until after Stalin's death in March 1953, when his successors began carefully acknowledging some crimes of his rule. The full scope of Stalin's purges and the fabricated nature of charges against old Bolsheviks would not be officially acknowledged until the glasnost period under Mikhail Gorbachev in the late 1980s. Trotsky himself was not formally rehabilitated by Soviet or Russian authorities, as his criticisms challenged the entire political and economic structure that had developed.